Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and it's just so great to be back in South Australia. And I just have to take my hat off to Amanda because she was able to pronounce my surname. I have terrible trouble with that, and I remember having this difficult conversation with my wife, Carmel. I said, look, this name is terrible. No one can pronounce it, no one can spell it. And she said, no, it's great. It's terrific because it just doesn't mean anything. Because her name was Carmel Cunning. And her father, Frank Cunning, he was given a partnership offer by a fellow whose name was John Sly. So Cunning and Sly, timber merchants, they didn't take off in the end. And the other thing I'll add is, to totally lose the respect of community people, you go around calling yourself professor. So put that to one side. But my background is working in communities, so it's just such a pleasure to be with you. So for the next little while, I'm just going to talk through three main things today, and they were these things. And that is, what are the changes that are going on in our communities? There's an enormous amount of change that's occurring, and they create lots of challenges and opportunities for people in communities and for community centres. Then I was going to move on and say, well, okay, how can communities better manage these changes? How do we help communities to manage those situations that are arising? And the third key thing is, what does this mean for you in terms of community centres in the 21st century? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to do in new ways? And what perhaps might we need to stop doing? So they're the three key things I was going to sort of cover. So when you look around Australia, the communities in Australia, you look at urban communities and regional communities, you see a lot of things. You see it's a really mixed picture. You see a lot of communities that are doing great work. You see this is a youth forum, young people really engaged in their community. You see terrific engagement of people around the Men's Shed movement, a whole host of other things. But you also see difficulty. You also see economic change. You see struggle in terms of the viability of small business and in agriculture as well. And you also see frustration, disengagement, anger out there as well. And this happens to be the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. I'm a Queenslander, right? So I'm in South Australia. It's enemy territory, but regardless. But it's true. There's a lot of disengagement. There's a lot of cynicism. There's a lot of aggro out there in communities. So when you look across that, we see two types of change that are occurring. We see ongoing change. There's lots of things that have been there for decades, and we have to keep chipping away at them. There's no easy answer to them. And we also see a lot of emerging things coming over the horizon that we need to manage well in communities as well. So these are some of the ongoing changes that we're dealing with, and you deal with almost every single day. So there's the ageing population and the health issues that go with that. There's infrastructure and services, accessing basic infrastructure, roads, telecommunications, and accessing health services, education services, and a whole lot of other services that support communities. There's an ongoing disparity in terms of income and wealth, and that's getting greater and greater every year. There's industry competitiveness, and you know that more than anyone else. We're seeing changes in the car industry that you are facing right here and now. And that's just one example of this ongoing trend in we're losing our competitiveness in industry. There's the viability of small business and agriculture. There are a lot of people who make good money in business and in agriculture, but there are a lot of people who don't. There's a long tail there. And also digital access. If we're going to be really active in the digital economy, we still struggle getting access to fast broadband, particularly in rural and regional areas. And don't even mention the NBN. So, let's talk about ageing for a moment. Is there anyone from Lucindale? We can speak frankly. But this is an example of what's going on. Our population is ageing, and here's Lucindale predicting the future. They're basically saying, boy, we've got to get ready for aged care services. And you're all in the thick of that. But we know the ageing population is a huge issue for us. And so that age cohort, over the age of 65, it's growing at over 5% per annum. The fastest growth rate of any age cohort. And by 2031, there's going to be 1 in 5 Australians in that age group. And the number of aged Australians between now and then is going to double. And we're going to be in there, probably, most of us, I am. And the median age, at the 2011 census, the median age in Australia was 35 years. By 2031, it's going to be 47 years. So this creates a whole lot of issues around communities. It creates a demand for services in aged care, but it also raises the issue about how do communities support ageing people who need lots of care originally, in the end. There's also issues around accessing services. So this was a recent survey that was done of people who experience difficulty in accessing services. So this is the percentage of people in these different family groups in major cities, in regional areas and in outer regional areas that say, I'm having trouble accessing services. So you can see there that single parent families are the ones that have the most difficulty in accessing services in all of those cohorts. And so this is a continuing issue. How do we help people access services? And it's not just a rural and regional issue, because there's a thing called the myth of urban access. The myth of urban access is that you can live next door to a 1,000-bed hospital, but you just can't get in there because of waiting lists and so on. So difficulty accessing services is still a remaining ongoing thing that we have to chip away at. We also look at this in terms of service delivery. So what's shown in red on this map is the incidence of congestive heart failure. And what's shown in blue, the blue dots, are where the general practitioners are. So we see the disparity in terms of accessing services, particularly in rural and regional Australia. It's a really ongoing problem. And we see disparity also in terms of income and wealth. So if you were to look at the wealth of Australians, and you were to break it into 5 pieces, from the bottom to the top, and you put them into equal 5 pieces in the population, this is the graph that you would come up with. So what's shown in orange there is income, and what's in blue is wealth, assets. So what it's saying is that there's a huge disparity in terms of wealth. Almost all the income and wealth exists in the top fifth. The other 4/5 are, much, much less. So 20% of households in Australia own 62% of the wealth. The lowest 20% of households own 1% of the wealth. So this is an increasing issue for us in communities. And it's how we actually not equalise everyone. It's not about everyone being equal. It's about everyone having equity, having equal opportunity. So this is an increasing issue, and I'm sure you deal with this on a daily basis with the people that you work with in communities. We also see this: industry competitiveness, industry restructuring. And this is not new. This has been going on for decades. If you look at the footwear and apparel manufacturers in Melbourne in the 1950s and 60s, and they went out of business. And now we're seeing it with the car industry and a whole lot of other things. It's an ongoing thing, it's not new. But the question is, we've got fundamental businesses that are no longer competitive. And we've got to look at not just transition for their workers, but also how do we build a new economy around these changes. And it's not new. Does anyone remember this? BHP smelting in Newcastle was another classic. And on it goes. So there's some of the ongoing things that we need to keep chipping away at. There's a whole range of new things, believe it or not, that are coming over the horizon. So there are things like a growing middle class in Asia. It's creating lots of opportunities for us. There's climate change, new economies that are developing. There's tourism, particularly in rural and regional Australia. There's self-employment and ongoing casualisation of work. And there are cooperative business structures, new business structures. So here is the growth of the middle class in Asia. So since 2009, we've seen there's projected to be almost a trebling of the middle class through to 2030 in Asia. And so by that time, the 66% of the global middle class will be just to our north. And almost 60% of that middle class will be consuming goods. So we're going to see a lot of opportunities emerge in Asia. And you've seen this in, there's been the Asian Century and the Asian White Paper and so on. But this is going to create a lot of demand for all kinds of things that Australia produces. Whether it comes at a competitive cost or price is another thing. but we're going to see a lot of clean agricultural products going to Asia, that's for sure, as well as a whole range of other things. It's an opportunity for us. Also climate change. I don't want to get into climate change, but every brown dot that you see on that map there is an area of climate change vulnerability. In other words, it's a community that is going to find it hard to do two things. One is adapt to the impacts of climate change and transition to a low emissions economy. They're the two things involved in climate change, adaptation and transition. But you can see that particularly in rural and regional communities, they're going to feel the effects of climate change more than most, and they're going to have the most difficulty in transitioning to a low emissions economy. We see new economies emerging as well, and it's not just the digital economy. We see the sharing economy going on. There's a whole lot of bartering that's going on. Airbnb and all the rest of it is part of the sharing economy. The experiential economy, that's the food and wine economy. It's going up to the coast for a weekend economy. And you in South Australia are well positioned to grow in the experiential economy. Absolutely. We've got the digital economy and we have digital disruption. Lots of things are coming into the market and changing the traditional way in which the economy works. So we have to be prepared for that. Many of the people in your communities are facing this as we speak. And this is the next thing about the digital economy. This is American data, but it shows that Amazon, the big red line there, and digital sales is the blue line, and the green line is traditional retailing. So we can see that when Amazon comes in, there's just a huge growth in its turnover, and it often comes at the expense of local retail. And I would argue that with small business and with agriculture, if you were to divide the net turnover of those businesses by the number of hours that people spend in their business, those people would be working for less than minimum wage. So, they're the economic changes, and there's no one running screaming from the room. That's good. So let's move on to talk about some social changes. There's a whole raft of social changes. But you can see that here, increasing diversity. We're obviously increasing our diversity in our communities. We're seeing fewer nuclear and extended families. We're seeing people remaining single out of choice. We're seeing people delaying having children until later in life. We're seeing a lot of partial retirements, people doing different things in their retirement and not just getting to 65 and that's it. There's a whole lot of other things happening. We're seeing changing work-life balance, and we're seeing a reducing and changing role for government. We're seeing public-private partnerships. They're becoming more like a business rather than just providing public funding. A whole lot of things around that. But I wanted to dwell for a moment on volunteering, because there are big changes in terms of volunteering and participation in communities. What we're seeing is people getting involved in events, but not in organisations. So they will come to your school fete in their droves, but they won't be on the committee to organise it. So what we're seeing is a lot more participation in events. We're also seeing people postponing engagement in their community until they retire. So it's busy, 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 mortgage, kids, travel, commuting, God knows what, and then retire. Right, now I can volunteer. So the great thing about an ageing population is you're going to have more and more volunteers who are older, and that's a good thing. We're also seeing time poverty and the changing way in which people use their time. So the level of screen time has gone through the roof, but we're seeing changes in social norms around volunteering. Our parents' generation had a social obligation to be involved in their community. You go down and you be the president of the Rotary Club. You go down to the PNF. You get involved in the school sports day. That's your obligation. That's your thing. Nowadays, there isn't that obligation anymore. The people who volunteer are the ones who can't run fast enough, you know. But we see traditional organisations changing. People are no longer getting involved in the Rotary Club, the CWA, the Parents and Citizens. They're participating in different ways. They're on the You Fund Me page. You know, they're doing all kinds of other things. They come along to kids' soccer. You know, that's how they participate. They don't become the secretary of the Show Society. But there are two things that haven't changed. People get involved in their community through two things, through their children and through contacts and networks. So if your kids are involved in swim club, you're going to be on the committee at swim club. And if you've got a friend who's involved in Rotary, you're going to get an invitation to be involved in Rotary. So they haven't changed much. But here's what we see in volunteering. We know that rural and regional volunteering has always been higher than metro volunteering. That's been a consistent trend for a long time. And that's there. It's usually in the high 20s in rural and regional areas and in the mid-teens in metro areas. But this is the disturbing thing, this. So what we've seen in the last census, or between 2011 and 2016 censuses, we've seen a slight increase in metro volunteering, and we've seen consistent declines in rural and regional volunteering. These aren't huge. They're drops of 1 to 1.5%, but they show a trend in people are no longer volunteering as much as they used to, particularly in rural and regional areas. And the whole attitude towards volunteering is changing. When you go out into communities and say, "Hi, I'm from the government," or "Hi, I'm from the community centre, I want to engage with you," or "How about you volunteer in your community?" the overwhelming image that is created in people's minds is an image like this. Now, the tragic thing about this slide is I was talking at the time. It is sad but true. But we do see great volunteering. We do see great things. And this is a youth forum, the 250 people in the showgrounds for a day talking about their community. And so it's not all bad. But there are some great things happening. And you also see this. This is the wonderful town of Donald in Western Victoria. Donald is about 200 kilometres from Keith. You know, it's a joke. Okay. Thank you. Very good. One person got it. So Donald has got it, that people get involved in events, not so much in organisations. So this is what's going on in Donald, a small rural community in the Mallee, all kinds of things going in Donald. So yeah, we want you to be the Secretary of the Show Society, but come along to all these events as well. You know, that's how we want you to participate in the community. And when you compare that to the invitation that many people get to be involved in their community, which is like this, you can see the difference, right? Here's a public space. It happens to be in Griffith, and you know, that's the invitation people get to participate in their community. You know, there are some there that I don't even want to think about. But you also get that, or you either get this. You know, you can see the guy in the stripy shirt over there. So this is the way in which people get invited to participate in their community. Come to a public meeting and be bored to death. We've got to go about volunteering and involvement in a much better way, and I'll try and explain that a little later. So, there are some of the changes that are occurring. Ongoing change and new and emerging change. So, righto, how do we develop communities, or how do communities develop themselves, given all those changes that are going on? So, good question. Let's go back to tours. We have to go back to, okay, what makes a vibrant community? Well, according to the textbooks, these are some of the things that make a vibrant community. You do need access to infrastructure. You do need roads and hospitals and services and buildings and things like that. You need services. You do need banks. You need schools and those sorts of things. You need an economy. You need how people can make a living, make a livelihood. It doesn't have to be the formal economy. It can be the informal economy as well. It needs planning and policy. You don't live for today. You have some suggestion of where you're going in the future. So how we want our community to be. That's the most important question for any community to answer, that one. How do we want our community to be? And it's the most difficult question to answer, frankly. We also want amenity. It's got to be a nice place to live. So that's a very corporate view of what makes a vibrant community, because everyone in this room knows that it also takes this. This is what really makes a vibrant community. The first thing is enthusiastic people. People who have passion, motivation and interest. And the good news is there's lots of them out there. Even in the most difficult community, even in the most depressed community, there are people who are passionate, motivated and interested in something. Except if you're my father-in-law. There are also functional organisations. You need functional organisations. I know communities that have lots of organisations, more organisations than actual people, but they're not functional. They become boys' clubs. They become secret societies. They become very insular, protective things. And it's not the footy club, it's my footy club. So you need organisations that are functional. You need to rethink assets. Firstly, you need to put away deficits and liabilities and talk about assets, and then you need to rethink and redefine assets. You need strong networks, good, diverse networks, and you need good decision making, good public leadership and good public deliberation of public things and good decisions. And when decisions are made, they stay made. Lots of communities remake and remake and remake decisions. And you need this, hope. This happens to be scrawled on the wall of one of the bridges of Madison County, believe it or not. But you do need hope. And there are lots of communities where people live in hopelessness. But you do need hope. Hope being that tomorrow can be better than today. You've got to have that. And this is rethinking assets. This is the wonderful town of Mitchell, inland Queensland. It's always had the artesian water, but they redefined the water to become an artesian spa. And it's reinvented the whole place. It's become a huge tourist attraction, believe it or not, and it's created an enormous amount of change in Mitchell. And it was a struggling community. But it came from rethinking the artesian water. This is another way of rethinking assets. Sheffield, Tasmania, wonderful environment, just beautiful place, and they've taken that and put it on their buildings. And it's not only a celebration of the assets that they have, it's become a tourist attraction. And it's also an affirmation for local people about, wow, look what we've got. And we've also got this. This is Millicent down the road here. This is a local guy who's transforming a limestone quarry into a garden with a lot of unemployed young people. And it wouldn't happen without him. He's the key driver behind it. But it's rethinking the asset of a quarry into a garden that's made that happen. So this is the key to a lot of community development, this virtuous cycle here. You've got existing capacity, existing enthusiasm, existing networks, existing skills, existing go. And people have to care. They have to care about it. And they take action on what they care about. And through taking action on what they care about, they build more skills, more networks, and all those things that we know make community. The best story about community development, I can tell you, is about the library in a small town. I have to say it's overseas, it's in the US, but small town, and it went into depression. It lost its timber mill, went into absolute depression. And I said to the leader of a women's group there, they had worked to build a local library, got community effort behind the library. And I said to the leader, I said, that's a tremendous community effort, you know, there's the community library. And this woman said, yeah, sure, you know, we've got the library, but the best thing is, it's right in the main street. And everyone who said it couldn't be done has to walk past it every day. That is the key to community development, because not only has that little place got a library, what it's really got is more networks, more leadership, more enthusiasm, more involvement, all those things that we know make community. It's not about the library, it's about the process of doing it and the community building aspects of it. So this is an example locally. This is Warrabra in the mid-north. So this is the Warrabra Craft House. Right? Some of you will be familiar with it. Anyone here from Warrabra? Good. People saw this vacant building. They were passionate about arts and crafts. They revamped the whole building and created this. It's become a real community hub. It's become a tourist attraction. And sure, not everyone was involved. But sure, Warrabra's got the craft house, but what it's really got is more networks, more enthusiasm, more involvement, more direction, and that's what makes vibrant communities. Action on what people care about. And when people are yelling at you at a public meeting, you have to think in your mind, well, at least they care. They wouldn't be yelling at you if they didn't care. So, getting through this, and I'm hoping I'm managing my time well. Okay, so they're the principles of vibrant communities. And this is some of the other things you need to be thinking about. You need some ingredients. You need some ingredients in the mix. The more of these ingredients you have, the more you're going to run. So first off, you do need enthusiasm, passion. May not be always well directed, but you do need enthusiasm and passion. You need ownership. You need people saying, well, yeah, there are things that government should do and the damn council, they should do things too, but I'm going to also do something as well. I'm going to take ownership of it. You need collaboration. You need to have people working together. You need experimentation, doing something differently. There are a lot of people in your communities that think that their right arm will fall off if they do it differently, but it needs to be done differently. You need local leadership. You need resources. Now, that's a constant struggle for you, but it doesn't mean $1 million. You can do a lot with a little, but you do need something. And what really cheeses volunteers off is relentless fundraising. That cheeses people off a lot. And you need allies. You need to actively get allies to support you. So by that we mean this. This is the absolute example, the epitome of enthusiasm. This is Normanton in the Gulf country in Queensland. And Normanton is a very remote community, struggling. And these people locally have talked about futures for young people in Normanton, which is a huge challenge. And we've got a whole list of things there about what we could do about that. And instead of them saying, damn council, they should be doing this, and they're actually writing their names down beside actions and saying, this is in priority because I want to do something about it. That's enthusiasm, passion, and motivation. There are two ways in which people participate in their community. Participation by obligation and participation by motivation. And that's motivation right there. This is local leadership. This is a local council, happens to be Barcaldine Regional Council, Central Queensland. Sorry for all the Queensland examples. But these guys are a typical local council, but they show great local leadership. They are really trying to be different and experimental. They really are connected. They do a terrific job. And they actually did this. They formed a Grey Nomads project to involve grey nomads in the local community, to mentor local businesses and do all that sort of stuff. Huge success. But that's all about local leadership. There are some ingredients. Now you have some enablers. You need things to make the cake rise. And the first one is drivers. You need drivers in your community. Nothing will happen, even if you have $1 million, nothing will happen unless you have drivers. You need organisation. You need small, visible successes. That nothing more will build communities than that. You need to have ways for people to participate. You've got to have stamina. 3 S's in community development. Study. You've got to understand communities. Second, you've got to have stamina and work through it and tenacity. And the third one is sweat. Then deliberation. You discover things through deliberation. We don't have enough deliberation. So here are some examples. This is the wonderful town of Marburg. And the guy in the pink shirt is Bob Hampson. He is a classic community driver. He is not the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce or anything like that, but he is the quiet voice that encourages and mentors and keeps things going locally. Without Bob, Marburg would be half the community that it is now. Here's deliberation. This is a wonderful health forum held in a local community, and it's through deliberation and discussion that people discover new options. And it's these avenues for deliberation that we need to have. So there's some of the basics around community building generally. And I remember being at, you're at a barbecue, you're standing there with a police officer, a plumber, an electrician, and they turn to you and say, so mate, what do you do? And I say, I work in community, I'm a community developer. And they say, okay, what's that involve? And I said, well, I go out and I talk to people, I figure out what they want to do, and then I help them to do it. And they looked at me and said, and you get paid for that? But that's fundamentally what it is. There's no such thing as a community developer. We don't develop communities. Only communities can develop themselves. But they need help to do that, and that's what we do. So, what then? Given all that, what then is the role of community centres? And there's your role. Those 4 things, it's off your website, they're the 4 things that you tend to do. And there is nothing better than those 4 things. Those 4 things hit the mark absolutely 100%. That's exactly what we're about. Those things. Grow local leaders, engage with people, prepare people for change. Hallelujah. Absolutely fabulous to see that. And we build community relationships. Those 4 things are absolutely on the money. But in achieving those 4 things, these are the things that you have on your plate. I don't expect you to read that, but that's all the things that community centres do. It's heaps. I don't know how you do it, but there's everything from women's groups, youth groups, childcare, adult learning, goodness knows what. There's a whole host of things that you do. Absolutely critically important. And here we are talking about, well, what might you do differently? Or what might you do additionally? And I'm sure you're rolling your eyes. But you do a lot. So in the face of these changes, there are 2 key things that we need to think about. One is reaffirming the existing roles that you do, and also thinking about doing some things differently. So in terms of reaffirming some of your existing roles, you've got to remain a social hub. And I think it was the governor who mentioned it, or Susan who mentioned it. That social connection is absolutely crucial, absolutely important. And I don't think there's too many other people doing it apart from you. So you need a mechanism to bring people together. People will not come together unless there is an avenue to do that. You need to break down barriers to participation, and you need to have people rubbing shoulders. What makes social capital, you know, you've all heard of social capital, what makes that build in communities is not some ray of light that hits people, it's actually people rubbing shoulders. That's all it is, getting to know. And you create that very important mechanism for that to happen. So that's a critical role to continue. You need to continue to be a signpost for services. You deliver services yourself, but it's important for you to be a signpost to services as well, and to help people access those services that we know people have trouble accessing. It's also about inclusion, not just diversity. We can have diversity, we've got really diverse communities, but we don't necessarily have inclusion, right? So inclusion is all about helping people participate in the economy, helping them get a job or make a living in some kind of way, to be accepted, to make friends, to put down roots, to actually be part of the community and have that sense of belonging. The governor spoke so beautifully about him coming to a new community and being accepted and included. For every person of diversity out there, we would want them to tell the same story. And it's hard. There are lots of barriers to inclusion. But as community centres, we need to be thinking about how we create that environment of inclusion, not just diversity. We've got to discover opportunities through deliberation, and we've got to create ways in which people can share ideas and points of view and deliberate public issues. And we've got to deal with economic transition. There's going to be more of it, and we have to anticipate it. We're not anticipating these economic change well enough, and we've got to actually link people when these economic transitions are coming upon us. I've only got a few minutes to go. So that economic transition is a really critical thing, and to help people transition into the digital economy, for example. We have a project out west, way out west, Birdsville, Badoorie, that area, far western Queensland. There's a woman who lives in Junda, which is a very remote, isolated community, and she went there for love. She married the local a carpenter who works for the council. It's the fate of many women, right? And so she's in Junda, but she's a fashion designer who's worked in London, and she finds herself in Junda, and she can't wait. She's busting for the fast broadband to reach her, because she's going to start a fashion design business in Junda, believe it or not. And she can interact with colleagues in Sydney, Melbourne, New York, Paris, wherever, from Junda. So the digital economy really offers opportunities for her and other people in rural areas. That's the economic transition, to try and help that to happen. So doing things differently. There are some things here I'm going to suggest to you, and I'm an outsider looking in, naively. So we need to manage the emotional adjustment of change. We focus all the time about change being about economies and jobs and stuff like that, but it's about people, and people have an emotional process of adjustment to change. We never talk about it, we never deal with it. And it's like the grief cycle. You all are familiar with it. And a lot of older blokes tend to get stuck in self-justification. So why is this happening to me? This is wrong. Look at them over there. That's not fair. Look what I have to deal with. So we need to play a role in helping people to move on to acceptance and exploration of new opportunities. The emotional adjustment to change is not addressed, and we have to play a stronger role there, in my view. We being everyone, the royal we. We also need, in community centres, to manage outwards and upwards. The thing about what the work that we do in community development is, like Andrew said, it's so vitally important. It's the best investment we can ever make in a society, in our communities, yet no one values what we do. No one understands what we do. And just because some things can't be measured by figures and numbers doesn't mean that they're not important. We have to do a much better job of explaining what we do and showing the benefits of what we do than we currently do at the moment. And that means advocacy, smart advocacy with evidence. In our community sector, we often have the naive advocacy, which is, we are needy, give us money. That is often the point that's put across, and it gets us nowhere. We have to build business cases around the work that we do, and it's not just give us money, it's if you were to invest this money, this is the return that's going to come. You're going to get this benefit from investing this money. And we need to build much better public-private partnerships in the community sector. And we need to be able to demonstrate what we do a lot better. We have a minimal cost approach to community work, where if it costs us money to do something, we don't do it. That's what government's view is. Rather than, if we invest this money, this is the benefit. We need to be moving in that direction. We need multi-community collaboration. So much of our community work is focused on our single community. This is the community of wherever. So much of our work is about multi-community collaboration and learning from each other. And that's exactly what this conference is about. It's exactly what your networks do all the time. So do more of that. We need to challenge and innovate ourselves. It's a pity that the innovation word has come to mean 3D printers and digital startups. It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means doing new things or doing things in new ways. So we need to challenge ourselves to do things differently, to put assets together in new ways, to build new partners, to invest in relationships, and continually challenge ourselves to do that. And we need better ways of engagement and volunteering. This is my final bit, and I'm going to finish shortly. We talked a little bit before about volunteering. We need to do a much more different job in volunteering and participation. Because volunteering, given those challenges we have, it's like onion rings in communities. You know, there are onion rings of participation. There are cores to the onion ring, which is, you know, the 6 people who do everything. You know, no matter how big or small your community is, there's always 6 people who do everything. Outside that, there are participants, people who participate. They won't be on the committee, but they will help. And they're usually the spouses of the people in the core, you know. Then you have the observers, the people who are watching what's going on. They're keen to participate, but there are barriers to their involvement. They might be a single parent, they might be not have English as a first language, etc., etc. They have barriers. And it kind of looks like this. Outside that, you've got people who are aware of what you're doing. Oh yeah, I know about them, that's it. And then people who are not aware. So all issues in communities have onion rings. So over here, you know, there's a set of onion rings around arts and culture. There's a set of onion rings around sport. There's a set of onion rings around country music, you know, perish the thought. There's a set of onion rings around cars, you know, etc., etc. So you're in the core of numerous onion rings. You're an observer in an onion ring. You're a participant in another one, and so on. So many community organisations have lost their outer onion rings, and they've become just the 6 people who meet and join every month. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock in the hall, the same 6 faces, and we talk about stuff. And the outer onion rings are missing. That's a sign of a mature organisation that's not going far. We need to really reinvent participation using this kind of principle. So here's some suggestions. You've got to support the core. You've got to support the 6 people who do everything. They get worn out, they get burnt out, they become martyrs. You've got to support them and encourage them and mentor them and relieve them from time to time. You've got to delegate tasks out of the core. People in communities don't want responsibility, they just want a task. So you've got to delegate tasks, not responsibilities. There are people out there who say, oh, I want nothing to do with the school fete, I don't want to know anything about it, I don't want to sign any forms, I don't want to be a secretary of anything, but I'm happy to come and man the barbecue for 2 hours. That's fine, I can do that. Just tell me when to turn up. So you've got to delegate tasks. out of the core. The third one is temporary commitments. In other words, you've got to bring people into the core and back out again, temporarily. So the invitation that many people get to participate in their communities goes something like this. Mary down here, I've been the president of the P&C for the last 10 years. It's really burnt me out. I'm really over it. I'm totally sick of it. We're looking for a new president. We asked everyone here if they wanted to be the president, and they said no. So how about you be the president? That's the invitation people get, and it's participation by obligation. And what Mary's thinking is, oh, righto, I'll do my duty and step up and do this, but I'm out of here. In 2 years, I'm out of here. We've got to change that around to a temporary commitment. A temporary commitment goes something like this. Mary, we think you're a great singer. We would love you to be involved in our organisation for just one night a week for the next 3 weeks. How about it? It does two things. One is it's achievable within her busy life. She can come for one night a week. She can't be the president, but she can handle that. And also, it values her. You got something, we recognise it, and we invite you. So that's a temporary commitment. So every organisation needs a president, a secretary, a treasurer, and a manager of temporary commitments. Someone who issues those invitations, right? So it needs to be action-based. There's a wise old woman who once said to me, I want two things from community involvement, just two things. One is respect, and the other is action. Just if you deliver those two things, you've got me. So we need to have action. And there's a term called reverse engagement. Engagement that you're familiar with is you go out, you talk to as many people as you possibly can, you process all that, and you say, right, after all that process, we're going to do A, B, and C. What reverse engagement is regardless of what the priority is, we're going to do something. We're just going to take some action. We're just going to do something, no matter what it is. And by taking action, people get to notice it. And they say, what's going on over there? I wouldn't mind being involved. So you need to be thinking about reverse engagement and action-based engagement. Final 2 points. If you were to think through these 3 questions, what would initiate someone's involvement? What would mediate their involvement? And what would inhibit their involvement? You will have good insight into what's driving people's involvement. So if you were to think about a small business owner, a family, a new immigrant, whoever, a farmer, those 3 questions, you'll get some insight into how you might be able to involve them. Final thing is, what inhibits a lot of engagement is you've got the same 6 faces who won't let go. They will complain all day about how burnt out they are, but they won't let go. And you need ways of helping them let go. Because lots of people are in that position because their self-worth is associated with the position that they hold in their community. And when you say, listen mate, you've been the president for 20 years, how about you step aside? You're not just talking about the footy club, you're talking about their self-worth. So you need a way of preserving their self-worth, but creating space. That's why you have patrons and past presidents and distinguished friends and things like that. Preserving people's self-worth, but creating space to do things. So, what we've done is we've talked over what changes are happening in communities, how communities can remain vibrant and really grow in the face of that change, and what your role might be in helping that to happen. Thank you very much for your time. If we've got time for questions, more than happy to take some questions.
Has anyone got any questions for Jim Cavaye? Frank Cunning, was it?
Yeah.
What a great name. Frank Cunning. I love that.
Now,
G'day, Frank Cunning here.
You're all sworn to secrecy because if that story gets back to my wife, I will be in big trouble for even telling that story.
Come on, put it on social media, everyone.
No.
Hashtag Connecting Communities 2017. Hashtag Frank Cunning. I wanted to know, I want to talk about volunteering. You know how you said about the person that doesn't let go. Mm-hmm. How do you make them let go? I mean, have we all experienced that person? Yeah, I've got a few at school, let me tell you. How do you make them let go? Apart from telling them it's time to leave.
It's about preserving their self-worth. So it's about inviting them to take on a role that preserves their involvement and their self-worth and the respect that they're held in, but allowing the operations to continue. So it's a matter of saying, you've been the president for 20 years, we would love you to become a mentor. for our footy club or whatever it is. And that's a different kind of role. It's a respectful, dignified role, and we want you to really work with young people or whatever the role might be, but it's a different role, but it still maintains their status. And then you allow a new president to come in. And, you know, this is all, there's no guarantee that this will work, right? They will still perhaps interfere, but at least you're creating that opportunity for space. That's right.
Because I suppose everyone wants to feel needed, don't they, in some capacity, and you just have to tap into that.
Absolutely, and it's very important that we don't just say to people, oh, thanks for your doing your bit, you're now on the scrap heap. You know, that's how they perceive it, right? And I remember there's a small community north of where I live in Toowoomba, right? It's a great place. And north of there's a beautiful town called Crow's Nest. And Crow's Nest has an old bowls club. It's like a crackerjack situation, exactly like that, right? And so there was a chef, a cook that came to the Crow's Nest Bowls Club. And he went to the president and said, hey, you know, instead of having an AGM on a Thursday night, why don't we have it on a Sunday afternoon? And we would invite families down, we'd have barefoot bowling, you know, we get all this participation, and we might actually get some volunteers, you know. And the president said, oh, no, we can't do that. And the guy said, well, what, public liability insurance, you know, what's the problem? And he said, oh, no, we've always had our AGM on a Thursday night. And that, I mean, that's what you're up against. But there was a question here.
Oh, it wasn't a question, it's just a comment on that offering a mentorship. We've got a gentleman who was a president for...
Do you want a microphone? Hang on, I'm going to get you one.
He's got one.
Thank you. We had a gentleman who was chairman of the board for 25 years and was stuck in the 1950s. And every time we offered some kind of experimentation or change, he was very against it. We've actually offered him now to be our consultant. So he did have a couple of health problems which helped him reduce the amount of hours that he spent. So we kind of capitalised on that and said, look, we understand that you can't come to the meetings every month, and that's really sad. But if you could be our consultant, and if we need any help with anything from the past or to understand the past to go ahead.
That's right.
Particularly anything from the 1950s. Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
I think my voice is loud enough. I was just thinking of
No,
succession planning.
Yeah, do it on the microphone because it's hard down the back.
Oh,
There you go.
I was just thinking of succession planning. So if you're going to get someone in, then I suppose two ends to the statement. You're either preventing it from happening, or how do you deal with it if it's a problem now? So yeah, I was just succession planning. You know,
A good committee always does that, though, don't they, Jim? A good committee or a good board always looks for succession planning.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen well enough.
Yeah.
Succession planning is something we really have to continue to work at. And it's not only a matter of encouraging people to come up and participate, but it is about opening up space at the top end as well. And we often encourage people to participate, and we don't allow the space to occur. And so you go to young people in many communities and say, hey, how about you get involved in the show society? And the overwhelming response is, well, God, you know, have a look at it. You know, why would I be involved in that? So we also need to recognise that the way people want to participate is no longer necessarily the way that we think of it. So coming along to a meeting on a Thursday night and sitting in the hall is not necessarily the way that the next generation wants to participate. So you've got to embrace technology, you've got to embrace a whole lot of different ways in which people might interact, and that's something that our generation has to get more used to as well.
And sometimes too, I think it's taking a crazy idea, like, you know, the silos in Brim, you know, in that town called Brim. Have you all seen the silos there? And then they've been copied in Canalpin. So recently I was driving back from the AFL Grand Final. I'm a Richmond supporter, I'll just out myself there, I'm so sorry. But it was awesome to see what's popped up around those silos. You know, there was a community barbecue for the primary school. Someone had gone and printed stubby holders with the silos on it. The town had decided to do an all-town garage sale that day. So looking at that Donald example, You know, and that's a fairly crazy idea. Like if someone had said, let's paint these silos and activity would happen, I'm sure there would have been a hell of a lot of doubters. And that was awesome to see a whole town that most people just drive through, really, stopping. There was even a silo cafe has popped up. I mean, it's awesome to see such activity from what is a pretty crazy idea. Any other questions?
Yes.
Microphone. We got the microphone. Down the front.
Just over here.
Some great stuff in there. It's really, I think it gives a lot of enthusiasm to what we do. It's really good. My question's around fear of risk and things like that. A lot of us work within local government and that, and sometimes that tends to put a lid on things. So how do you, how do you create passion and enthusiasm in amongst all of that as well?
You're dealing with a culture in local government, and look, all of us have great respect for local government. They're the tier of government that really is connected with communities, and they have a lot to deal with on their plate. But there is often a culture, particularly in local government, of simply risk mitigation. That is it. If anything might cause us difficulty or problems or come back to bite us, well, we're not going to do it. And what we want is entrepreneurship, which is not crazy risk-taking. It's not, go crazy. It's entrepreneurship is really well-researched, well-organised, well-led risk-taking. So I'm sure you've all have children that have taken risks, right? So ridden, skydived, ridden their bike, climbed a tree and fall out of it, all that sort of stuff, gone out with a wild girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And you as a parent would go, oh, look, there's a bit of a problem. You shouldn't do that, So we've got to have risk in communities, but it's got to be well researched, well organised, have a good business case and have good leadership and good decision making. That's a very big difference between just crazy risk taking. Hey, let's do something nuts. I'm sure the silos and other things would have, well, I hope that they would have been well thought out. A crazy idea, but a really well thought out business case. So we're involved in supporting cultural change in local government to change from being let's not do anything that might be risky to an entrepreneurial approach. And it's ironic that we challenge communities all the time to be entrepreneurial, to be innovative, to do things differently, yet we're the last ones to do that. In particular local government, particularly universities, geez. It's a long-winded, convoluted answer, but it's about entrepreneurship rather than just risk-taking, and we need to encourage that. I'm a great believer, if you want to change culture, to have people get out and see it. They've got to see it, touch it, feel it. So I would be encouraging local government and other people to go and discover your own backyard. Get on a bus, go and see things that people are doing, and show them. Don't just, there's a classic thing, show me, don't just tell me. And if they can see what really goes on behind the doors of all these things, they will start to get more comfortable with risk.
And if you've got a legal department, and this happens a lot in education, there's a legal department, and if a school principal goes to the legal department and says, what do you think about this? The legal department are going to say no, because there's a risk associated with it. Whereas people higher above go for your life. So don't necessarily, you don't have to, just because you've got a legal department, you don't have to get their approval on everything. No, but it's true. You don't. Only when it goes tits up.
Centres.
Yeah, hashtag. That's official. No, can we please put our hands together for Jim Cavaye? Forget
Thank
the
you.
professor.
Thank you. Oh,
There you are.
thank you very much,
Thank you.
Amanda.
That was awesome.